In this session we're going to be looking at layers. Layers are parts of an image which are stacked on top of each other, and they allow you control over independent areas within an image for editing, adding text, combining images, and many other options. What we're going to do in this session is look at the concept behind layers, how they work, and the tools that are available to you within the layers dialog box and the layers menus. So I'm going to open up a pre-prepared image, and this image has been created using layers, and we're going to look at the image and how each layer is interacting with each other. So in order to see that, we need to go into the layers dialog box, and if this is not available to you here, you can go into your Windows and in the dockable dialog box click on layers, and that will add it to your dialog box. So once we open this image, you will see that we have a layer structure, and the reason why we have the dotted line around the number 3 is that's the currently selected layer. This layer here is the background or base image, and you can see the dotted line has gone to that as soon as I click on it, and each layer then is based above that. In the practice of using layers within images, your basic image that you bring in initially will be considered your background layer, or in GIMP it's called a base image, and from that point on you have your layers available to you, and each time you add a layer it goes directly above the currently selected layer, which may be or may not be the background layer. So if I click on any of these layers in the selection pane, you can see that that checker box is showing you the currently selected layer. Now any of these layers, by double clicking on the text, I can give them a name. It's a good practice to get into, because as you develop an image and you have a load of layers in there, it's handy to know that that layer relates to a specific item or task. The thumbnails that you're seeing here might not necessarily be that big depending on what's on the layer, but at least you'll have a piece of text there which is telling you this relates to that particular task. So once you've named the layer, you just press enter and the name becomes part of the layer. Within this area here, which is the main work area of your layers, you will see that each layer has a little eyeball button beside it, and that allows you to switch off the visibility of each layer. Now we're not deleting the layer at this stage, we're just basically making them invisible. And if I switch off the final layer, the background layer, you can see this checkerboard pattern, and that is basically telling you that there's nothing there. You cannot represent nothing by using black or white because that's a color, so you get this checkerboard effect. So we just switch on the background layer, and then in turn, as I switch on each layer, you will see them once again. We haven't actually lost the data, we've just made them invisible. There is another button here which gives you a chain link, and that allows you to lock that layer in position, so the layer won't actually move from its current position. So I'm going to leave that unchecked for the moment, and if I go to the move tool and I need to select, say, layer 1, when I use the move tool will actually move layer 1. So whichever is the current selected layer, that is the one that moves. Now you'll notice that these 3 layers are in descending order from 1, 2, 3 down to the background, and the number 1 layer is overlapping number 2, and number 2 in turn is overlapping number 3, and that is to do with the structure that they have been placed within this stack of layers. So the layer stack determines how each layer interacts across each other, but I do have the option to change the position of those layers, and I'm going to go to layer number 2. So layer 2 is currently below layer 1 but above layer 3. And at the bottom of the layers palette, I have a couple of buttons here which we'll look at them all in a moment, but I have the option to raise this layer 1 step in the layer stack, or I can lower the layer within the layer stack. So if I lower it down, you will see that it now is behind both the 1 and the 3. If I raise it back up to its original position and then raise it again, you will see that it overlaps the 1. It is now the top of the pile, and that is reflected back over here in the layer stack. So any of those layers can be moved from position to position. Just make sure that the one you're using is actually highlighted, and we can move it up or down the stack as required. Just above that area we have the ability to lock either the pixels, in other words the paint within an image, or we can lock the alpha channel of that layer. And above that again we have the opacity of each layer. Now I'm going to move to layer 1 because that's now on top, and we look at opacity. Opacity goes from 100% fully opaque to 0% fully transparent. And I can do that by simply moving the mouse here till I see this arrow, and by dragging the transparency slider I can reduce or increase the transparency of that layer. And you can see with that at 48% I can now see through the red of layer 1 and onto layer 2 below. If I prefer, I can actually type over that number and press enter, and I have a 0% opacity. I can make that 100% and I'm back to full opacity. Directly above that again we have mode, which is now normal, and this mode determines how the layers interact or blend with the layer directly below. And if I click on the down arrow, you'll see there's quite a long menu of options available to you there. You have normal as the default and dissolve directly below it. Then you have the modes broken into groups. Lighten only, screen, dodger, addition, they all lighten the blend between the top layer and the layer directly below. Darken only, multiply and burn will darken the transition, and you can actually see there when I did lighten only we've got a combination of red and green, which is giving us the yellow. If I darken that, you can see that it's actually going to black, and this has become quite dark. Overlay and the overlay subgroup, and then you've got different subtract, grain, extract, grain, merge and divide, and then there's a hue, saturation, color and value blending modes available to you. So that's quite an intensive menu to work through, but some very effective results can be had. So below the actual layer structure itself, a couple of tools at the bottom here. This very first button creates a new layer and add it to the image. It'll create actually a blank layer. We get the option by using the dialog box to name the layer, and we'll just call this blank layer. Okay, and the width and the height that's in there by default is based on the image, so each layer will cover the entire image. Now if I want to fill the layer, I can fill it with a foreground color, a background color, a white or a transparency. If I leave that transparency, I'm going to get the checkerboard behind it. Now what you need to observe is this is actually going to go in above layer 1 because layer 1 is selected. So if I say OK, we end up with a blank layer above layer 1. So if I was to do exactly the same at the background level and create a new layer, and we'll call this above background, and you can see it's gone just above the background. Whenever you're adding layers like that, just make sure that you have your layers selected. But I've created these two layers and now I realize I don't need them. So I can go to the very last button on this palette and I can delete this layer. And the same with the other layer. Now you will notice that I'm not getting any confirmation, are you sure you want to do this? So make sure before you start that you selected the right layer and that you click on the bin and the layer will disappear. This other button here, the second one in, create new layer group and add it to the image, creates a folder in which you can put your layers. It's just purely a housekeeping thing. It means that all the layers that relate to each other can be grouped into this folder, and it just tidies up this structure here. So I'll just dump that one. This button here, create a duplicate of the layer and add it to the image. So whichever layer has been selected, we'll select layer 3, and if I create a duplicate of that layer, you'll see I have layer 3 and I have layer 3 copy. If I select that and I use the move tool, you can see that I have the second layer there, and layer 3 copy is actually above layer 3 because it went in above the layer that was selected. So I can delete that layer again. This button here, anchor the floating layer. When you bring new images in a copy and paste mode, or you copy from one image and paste it into this image, it becomes what's called a floating layer. By anchoring the floating layer, it becomes a proper full layer, and you have all the controls over that you will have over a normal layer. The whole idea of layers is what's called a non-destructive process rather than damaging the image behind you. So I also have a layers menu, and the menu allows me to do certain things that we've already looked at in the layers group, but it also has some extra tools in there that we need to have a look at. So within there you have the option to use stacks. There's slightly more in there in the fact that you can raise or lower to top level or to bottom level depending on where you've selected. You can also apply a mask to your layers, and masks are used in editing to hide and reveal what the layer is actually doing. It's a more detailed process, and you can find quite a lot about that within the GIMP manual. Transform, rotate a layer and this will apply specifically to the layer that has been selected. So I rotate that one counterclockwise 90 degrees by that much. We can also scale the image. We can change the layer boundary size, layer to image size, and we can auto crop the layer. So there's quite a lot of tools within the layers menu that are not available over in the dialog box, but you will spend most of your time working within the dialog box because you've got a visual representation of what's going on there, and it gives you the structure that you have within a layered image. And once you have a layered image within GIMP, you can then save it under this file extension GIMP XCF image, and that means that when the image is saved, you will retain this layer structure, so you can go back and work on the image with its layer structure intact. So layer structuring is a very, very important tool for image editing. It's well worth an understanding how layers work and how they interact with each other within an image, and it's a major step forward in your image editing skills. You can take this 1, 2, 3 image for example, and you can see how a system works and get a deeper understanding of the benefits of using layers in your image editing work.